Today we're talking about how do we know what is it that we know about the world. So very related to your task. It's a good time to discuss this. And I'm going to talk about very specific kind of biases or things that we should think about when we're thinking about hard information. So generally, there's this situation where we're faced with an information and that we don't know what the answer is to this. Somebody is telling us something. The professor has a PowerPoint saying that this is the truth. But how do we know that this is the truth? And it seems like everybody is just very confident. Everybody's telling us what they think about the world. You know, a TikToker can tell us what vaccines, whether they work or not, or somebody on YouTube tells us whether there's climate change or not. People with claimed authority tell us that they know what the world is like, but then we have to make our own minds in order to assess their credibility, assess their authority, assess their claims. So we're trying to write a book together in order to help others understand what information is, but I want us to do a few exercises today. So actually, you will do two tasks today. One is a little bit competitive, anonymous, so we don't know who is doing what. But the other one is for you to sit down with yourself and see whether you know something. How do you know whether you know something, and why is this important for us? So I'll just start with a very general exercise. This is not one of the two exercises. This is just a startup exercise. So we want to know your general knowledge about facts in the world. So we'll start with this Mentimeter to kind of get your general knowledge about stuff like the Bible. How many of you know anything about the Bible? The Bible, Christian, a little bit, yeah? Bible? Yeah, so there's so many people have different ways of looking at the Bible. I'll just say that I'd say one big fraction and one small fraction. The Christians see the Bible as the Old Testament and the New Testament all together. But the traditional view of what the Bible is just the Old Testament, so what the Jews refer to as the Old Testament. So I'm just asking you as an initial, I'll just hide this so you can make predictions. Yeah, so please scan this or go on this menti.com and use the URL. But I have two questions for you. Make an estimation. And I want you to give me a low bound and a high bound. So you don't need to know the exact number of books in the Old Testament, but I do want you to have kind of like a range. So give me a range where you're confident, 95% confident and above, that whatever your answer is within this range. So I have two questions for you. One is how many books are in the Old Testament in the Bible? Try and estimate by giving a range, low bound and high bound, okay? So let's do that. So it's somewhere between 0 and 500. We've got 4, so I'll let you think about this a little bit more, but please do try and participate and estimate this because there is a message here for you, something to learn about yourself and how you do things, okay? So this is the first question, okay, good, we have eight of you. The second question is this. Yeah, how many countries are there in Africa? Try and estimate. Lower bound, higher bound, okay? From 0 to 500. Yeah, so it's actually good that many of you don't know much about the Bible. And I'm guessing that even if you grow up learning the Bible or knowing something about the Bible, it's a little bit elusive how many books there are in the Old Testament. Africa is something that I think we all thought about at some point in time, but we're not really sure because we haven't taken the time to actually count the number of countries, right? So the important thing here is to have a low range, a low boundary and a high boundary so that we have like a confidence interval of where that range is. All right, now that we have 10 of you, let's play this video. It's from Brain Games. It's a terrific TV show. If you don't know that show, it gives you a lot of things, and it's about the topic of overconfidence. So we want to see whether in this classroom we have some overconfidence about two basic facts about how many books are there in the Old Testament and how many countries there are in Africa. So let's see the main message here.
Don't believe your brain is overconfident? Deception specialist Apollo Robbins is hitting the streets with a game designed to prove you wrong.
I want to play a game with you real quick.
Apollo is going to ask people on the street some trivia questions, and you can play along at home.
That's a good start, huh?
You don't have to know the exact answer to each of the questions, but just give a range that you're completely confident encompasses the answer. For instance, if I ask you how many continents there are, and you're not sure of the answer, but you think it's around 7, all you have to do is come up with a range of numbers that you're confident includes the right answer, like 4 to 12. Got it?
Okay.
Ready for the first one? I guarantee it's harder than you think. This is the Bible. How many books make up the Old Testament? Remember, all you have to do is pick a range. Are you feeling pretty confident in your answer? Because we're pretty confident you just got it wrong.
They're very confident about thinking that you did not get this right. So I'm curious to see what we did as a class. So we'll just come back and see what the answer is here. Yeah. All right. So the first one, the range that we had is from 113 to 349. Did I get this right? Yeah. Okay. And then for the second one, what we got was the number of countries from 81 to 179. Does that make sense? Oh, we've got like very extreme people. Let's see. Oh, we've got this. Okay. Got it. The range. Interesting. All right. Previous one, I'm really curious about this. Okay. Wow. We've got these. Okay. Good. I ran this in previous classes and I gave the range 0 to 100. And then I thought, what would happen if I would change the range? And now I'm seeing some very extreme responses to this. Usually I get this stuff when I do participant pool online. I get people just giving me like wild guesses. This is not something that I expected, but okay, we've got a general guess. So let's see what happens.
The number of books in the Old Testament. That's a range.
Oh, 10.
So we're going to say 10 books in the Old Testament. And the high number there could possibly be?
15.
15.
7.
7, okay. And how high would you go?
25.
What do you think? Do you have your range? The answer is 39.
It's actually 39 books in the Old Testament.
All you had to do was give a range that could, without a doubt, include that number. Not so easy, is it? Let's try another. How many countries are in Africa?
The number of countries in Africa?
17.
17. What's your high answer?
30.
30.
Yes.
Okay.
0.
And high?
I'll say 24.
Do you have your answer? Are you confident the correct answer fits within your range? The answer is 57.
But whenever we try and calibrate this, even when we did this kind of scale together as a class, then we got this very, very wrong. So we were 95% sure that we'll get this within this range, but we did not get to that. So the question is, what should we do when we're faced with this kind of situation? And not just with these silly questions that maybe don't have an application to our lives, but also when we see something on TikTok or on YouTube and we read something in the news and we want to know, usually we use our gut intuition and then we try to calibrate this into something that's very, very narrow. But sometimes it's okay to say, we don't know what the answer is. So if we don't know what the answer is, maybe 0 is a little bit ridiculous, but Africa maybe not a country, so maybe you start with 2, but it's okay to broaden the range when we're not confident, right? So this is about how we choose the ranges. Do we choose something that's very narrow, but then we don't know much about the topic? So if we don't know much about the Old Testament or Africa, then maybe we want to broaden the range, right? Okay, so this is the main message that they're trying to deliver in this video.
So how'd you do? Better this time?
Oh, sorry, you missed on that one.
Getting killed.
What exactly does this game have to do with overconfidence? Think about it. You likely had no idea for certain how many countries were in Africa.
So why would you limit the range you gave? Even a little bit.
Almost all of our participants gave extremely small ranges, even though they didn't have a clue. Now are you catching on? You don't need to know the answers to any of these.
Length of the Mississippi River in miles. What would you say the low is?
1.
1? Okay, I think you got part of the system down. High?
3,000.
And submit. Bingo, you got one right. See?
Yeah, I'm getting
You see
this
what the
game.
system is?
Yeah.
You just need to give a big enough range. If any of these answers fell outside your ranges, that means that like 79% of our participants, you suffer from overconfidence.
Yeah, so that's the first thing that I wanted us to talk about, overconfidence. And I'll introduce you to some interesting folks later on. But now that you know about overconfidence, I want you to test your overconfidence. So I'm going to give you a task. All of you are getting the same task. So just take one and pass along, okay? You can start answering this. I want you to make some predictions. Sorry, you'll get it from them. Take some, pass along. Yeah, take one, pass along. You can start working on this. It should take you about 10 minutes. Actually, I'll take one. So I can, yeah. All right, so we've got a calibration practice. You have 40 different questions. And what is important here, and I want you to focus on this, it's not so much important whether you know the answer or not, or get it correctly, is that you have good calibration. So on the side, you see, how sure are you? So first, you make a decision whether something is true or false, right? Or which country has more people in 2019. But then if you don't know what the answer is, you need to calibrate accordingly. So your main aim is not to get as many right as possible, but to be well calibrated about what you know, what you don't know. So if you know something very, very well, you should be saying that you have 95% confidence. If you don't know something very well, you should have something like 55% confidence, okay? So for each one of those, rate, true, false, which country, and so forth, and then how sure you are. And then I have a general question, and that's at the beginning. How many of the 40 questions will you be able to answer correctly? So make a prediction, and then how many do you think your classmates, and then predict how you would compare to your classmates above, the same as, and below. Once you complete this, on the other side of the page, you can do your calibration to check how right you are. But first do this, and then I'll tell you the right answers. Good. So let's have a look at your Mentimeter. So just that we know whether we're calibrated or not calibrated for this. So we've got 13 of you, okay? If you want to help out, so how many do you think you will get correctly? How many you think your classmates will get correctly? And then later, how many did you actually get correctly? So you can already answer the second one as well, but I'll show you the predictions. The predictions were that you will get, so comparing to others, you think that you'll know less than your classmates, which is already an interesting kind of little bias there. So on average, you thought that you'll get 18. So it's almost like 50-50. But you thought that your classmates will be a little bit better than you. So that's a fun thing to see. And then for the next one, just write in how many you actually did, and then we can check your calibration about your predictions regarding others. You can just answer that. Yeah. So actually for this, you were pretty well calibrated. Your predictions about others were like, what was it, 23, 24.2, 23.9? Well done. That's very, very good. Yeah. Good. So I'll let you finish this. And then I want you to kind of summarize for yourself whether you're underconfident or overconfident. So as you can see over here, so underconfident is over here. So here we have the forecast, and here we have the actual percentage that you get correctly, right? So if you're always forecasting that you'll be lower than what you actually are, so you're like this, then this means you're generally underconfident. But if it's under the calibration line, then it means that you're overconfident. And then even for people who are very well calibrated, we've got two different types of people. So you can see which one of those you are. So we've got people that are on the line, but then most of their forecasts are somewhere in between 0.4 and 0.6. I don't know if you can read this, but it says ultra cautious, but well calibrated. Ultra cautious means whatever they face in the world, they say, we don't really know. So 50-50, 40-60, but they don't go beyond that. It could be that they don't know much about the world. So they're well calibrated about not knowing much about the world, but they're very, very cautious about their knowledge. People here are decisive. So very decisive, whether they know or they don't know something. So you can see which one of these people you fit in. And now I'm going to introduce you to some people who did some research on this and became very famous because of this overconfidence, underconfidence. And it's something very important about the way that we process and meet information, right? All right. I just want to say that overconfidence is a real thing. How do we know that this is a real thing? Because here at HKU, we conducted replications of this. So I actually did this in 2020 with all these fine HKU students. So we ran two teams. And we ran real data collections. We did here in Prolific and in MTurk. So two online samples, here 560, here 601. And we ran facts, and we asked people to do calibrations a little bit like what you did just now, and then to see whether they're well calibrated or not well calibrated. And then we found strong empirical support for overconfidence. People were repeatedly more and more confident, despite not really knowing the facts very well. So replication generally found the same findings as the original article, which is this classic finding from the 1970s. Baruch Fischhoff is still alive and well, I think, and very responsive. So he has helped us with materials and gave us some good feedback. So it was really nice to see two very good replications of a classic finding 50 years later. So that doesn't happen very often, but at least when it comes to overconfidence, it really seems like we can replicate these classic effects very well. Daniel Kahneman, one of the biggest voices in judgment decision-making about how we think about information, how we think about thinking, has this to say about overconfidence.
Society rewards overconfidence. We want our leaders to be overconfident. I mean, if they told us the truth about the uncertainty, we would discard them in favor of other leaders who sort of give an impression that they know what they're doing. We want overconfidence. We support it. We sustain it. And there is an awful lot of it. I mean, most of what we read in the paper is overconfidence. Sometimes it's catastrophic. Just about every war that you see. I think that's a general rule. There are optimists among the generals, and there are optimists on both sides. And that is true for a lot of litigation as well. So a lot of conflict is fed by overconfidence. There is an interesting story here of two biases that work in opposite directions. So one familiar, you can call it bias, but is what we call loss aversion. People put a lot more weight on negative events than on positive events, on losses than on gains. So that's one principle. If people are to gamble money on the toss of a coin, and they stand to lose $100, they will demand more than $200 to accept the gamble, which is in some ways ridiculously risk averse. So people are loss averse. On the other hand, they're optimistic. And so many of the decisions that people make, especially in starting new businesses, I mean, that is where it's been studied most extensively. People think they will succeed. They open a restaurant because they think they will succeed. But in fact, less than a third of small businesses survive for 5 years. So clearly, overconfidence is rife. And overconfidence and loss aversion seem to be acting in opposite directions.
Yeah, so it's very interesting that whenever we make big decisions in our lives, we make this almost based on an intuition of what the facts are. So you can definitely see this with restaurants. 10 different restaurants closed in the same location, but the new one that comes in thinks, my restaurant is the one that's going to be able to overcome this. So Danny Kahneman is the first person that came together with Baruch Fischoff and others to warn us about this. But the person who really took this forward is this person, Don Moore, from Berkeley. So you can see a very prominent researcher, received a lot of attention. And in the last 5 years, he came out with this book, which I strongly recommend, called Predictably Confident. Perfectly confident, sorry, how to calibrate your decisions wisely. So he's one of the first to say, we've got overconfidence, but we also, with some people, have underconfidence. And the main goal for us is to be well calibrated rather than this or that. Let's hear it from Don Moore.
Hi, I'm Don Moore, author of Perfectly Confident, and I've been studying confidence and overconfidence for over 20 years. My research has examined the different manifestations of both overconfidence and underconfidence. They're predictable circumstances under which most people believe that they're better than others. For instance, when I ask my students to rank themselves relative to the rest of the class with regard to honesty, about 80% of the class claims to be in the top half. Their views, while obviously erroneous, might nevertheless be justifiable if we consider the fact that most of us are honest about most things most of the time. Moreover, we can't be quite as certain about others, since we only observe what they say and we cannot know whether they truly believe it. So it's reasonable to believe that we're more honest than others. On the other hand, those very same students believe that they're worse jugglers than their classmates. The majority of them put themselves in the bottom half of the class. Most of them cannot juggle, but they suspect that some among them may have had a prior career in the circus, so it might be reasonable to think that they're worse jugglers than their classmates. Overconfidence is a real problem, but so is underconfidence. In the words of Teddy Roosevelt, I am just as little disposed to give way to undue pessimism as to undue and arrogant optimism. Both our virtues and defects should be taken into account. Overconfidence prompts us to take risks that will fail or claim more than we deserve. These are errors of commission. On the other hand, underconfidence prompts errors of omission. We avoid opportunities, competitions, and ventures in which we could have succeeded. Both are errors. The alternative? Calibrate your beliefs accurately. You should believe the truth.
Yeah. So it's a general message that we should deliver in our book to people. So sometimes it's okay to tell yourself, I don't know what the answer is. This is the reason why I need to go to experts. I need to read up on this. One of the students here actually Googled something to fact check what is it that I gave as an answer, which is the right way to go. So even when you've got a professor putting up the answers on the screen, it's like, is this the right thing? Maybe I know something else. So I want to check whether this really holds or not. Who's this guy? Spock? Where is Spock from? Who knows about Spock? Some of you? Star Trek, yeah. So I know this version. I grew up with this version. You probably know this version a little bit better, right? But Spock represents what? Where is Spock from? He's got this in his ears. You know what this is? He's a Vulcan. He's not from Earth. He grew up in a different planet, and this is a planet that follows rationality and logic. They don't make mistakes over there. They're 100% always sure that they follow their rational way of addressing things. So Spock here works with who? Who is the captain? Who's the captain in Star Trek that works with Spock? James T. Kirk. James T. Kirk is human, very emotional, very gut intuition instinct. So whatever it is, he doesn't think He just goes for it. And most of the time, he tends to win. But this balance between Spock and James T. Kirk is very interesting because they clash. James T. Kirk always wants to go and based on his emotions and gut intuition. And Spock is like, no, you're not calculating the odds correctly. So listen to me when I say what you're doing is actually stupid in his own Vulcan way. Why am I bringing Spock here? Because actually, Julia Galef, I'm going to talk about her with the Scott mindset, came out with a book. And one of the cute things that she did in her book is that she actually checked whether Spock is well calibrated or not. So she coded all the times that Spock says something is impossible, or when Spock says something is very unlikely, or likely, or more than 99% likely. And then she checked how many times it actually happens. So for example, when he said that something is impossible, then it tends to happen 83% of the time. So in the TV show, Spock is this ultimate machine, always calculating things rationally, but nobody actually took the time to sit down and see whether he's well calibrated or not. So she plotted the whole thing here, and then she showed that Spock is like all over the place. There's almost nothing where he's very well calibrated. So this is a really nice exercise, and she's the one who did your exercise. So she goes around in different organizations. She's part of this movement called effective altruism. You saw Peter Singer. So Peter Singer did the first books, and then came a lot of young people like Julia Galef with the Scout mindset. And she just wants to give people the tools in order to assess whether they're well calibrated or not. Or when you've got some authority, like Spock, telling you, I know, trust me, follow my lead, follow my advice, a tool for you to check whether others are well calibrated. So a good exercise for you to do is that if there's somebody that you really trust, why do you trust this person? Just look at everything that they've done, all the predictions that they've done, and check this against what actually happened, and then see whether this person is well calibrated. Will you, after seeing this, trust what Spock is saying in the next episode? I will not, right? So obviously, the script has its own way. It's not reality, but it is an interesting exercise to think about what calibration actually means. So this is like a part of her book. So for example, here, there's this thing where they're facing some situation, and then he says, Captain, intercepting all three ships is an impossibility. And impossibility, the word sounds so authoritative, so definitive, and yet less than 60 seconds later, Kirk has figured out how to maneuver in front of the ships, stopping them from doing the thing. So it is just in the characters over there, it tries to show, I think, humanity's win over rationality. But a very interesting exercise that she did here. I'll let her talk about overconfidence just a little bit in order to introduce you to her.
Scout mindset. It's the drive not to make one idea win or another lose, but just to see what's really there as honestly and accurately as you can, even if it's not pretty or convenient or pleasant. And this mindset is what I'm personally passionate about, and what I've spent the last few years examining and trying to figure out what causes Scout mindset. You know, why are some people, sometimes at least, able to cut through their own prejudices and biases and motivations and just try to see the facts and the evidence as objectively as they can? And the answer is emotional. So just as soldier mindset is rooted in emotions like defensiveness or tribalism, Scout mindset is too. It's just rooted in different emotions. So for example, Scouts are curious. They're more likely to say that they feel pleasure when they learn new information or an itch to solve a puzzle. They're more likely to feel intrigued when they encounter something that contradicts their expectations. Scouts also have different values. They're more likely to say that they think it's virtuous to test your own beliefs, and they're less likely to say that someone who changes his mind seems weak. And above all, Scouts are grounded, which means that their self-worth as a person isn't tied to how right or wrong they are about any particular topic. So,
yeah, I'm going to stop with her here. I'll just say that for a while, it seemed like this is just an interesting exercise about how we think about information and who we choose to follow and whose advice we listen to. But in the last 20, 30 years, there's actually a big part of social psychology that is making this a science of predictions. So in one of the following sessions after the reading week, we'll talk about super forecasters. So now the Americans, especially with the DARPA and the NSA and the CIA, try to see who are the people who are able to make the best predictions, who are the people who are able to be the best calibrated. And they did competitions on this, and they ran prediction markets. In some of the prediction markets, we at HKU also participated. So we ran a lot of replications, but we also asked people to predict, will things replicate or not? we also gave some money. So we started by giving people $50, and then if they did well, they could make money all the way up to 100. If they make predictions that were wrong, they went down to 0. So 50, 0 to 100, people can really stand a chance to win or lose money that we gave them. And then we see who are the people who are consistently better at making predictions. And there's a lot of money to be made from this. So super forecasters are based on these kinds of identification of who is more likely to make better predictions. So now there's a whole science of who are the super forecasters. And it's about being open, it's about being humble, it's about having a scout mindset. So Julia Galef is one of the many people who contributed to that line of research. All right, so we'll take a 5-minute break, and when we come back, I'll give you another quiz that we'll do together as a classroom to see whether your calibration has improved or not. 5 minutes. Okay, this is the last Mentimeter, I promise. But this is going to be a long one because I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and then you'll be able to check how well you're doing against the others. Okay? We're going to start with a very simple question about your understanding of the world. Seems like a lot of gloomy things out there. We had a pandemic, now there are all kinds of wars. My general question to you, is the world getting better or worse or about the same? So we'll start with this question, and then I'll give you a series of 13 different questions about the status of the world just to see whether we know what's going on in the world. Are we well calibrated or not? Okay. So now that you've had the exercise of overconfidence, underconfidence, hopefully now we'll all be very well calibrated in assessing the status of the world, information about the world. So if you can go on here. I think a good question to ask yourself is that if you could have been born at any time in the past or lived in any other period, what period would you rather be in? Like, what was the time in our history that was the peak, that was the absolute best? It seems like a lot of people have a lot of nostalgia for different times when there were no mobile phones, different times when there were no pandemics, different time when there was no stress, tension. All right. So I'll just ask you to go on the Mentimeter. I'll just share the results so far. The first question that I was asking you is the world getting better or getting worse? And it seems like 7, yeah. So it's a little bit split, but it does seem like the majority, almost 2 to 1, seems like the world is getting worse, which is it's a good understanding, because there's a lot going on in the world, and now we're exposed to this a lot more. So it's interesting just to have an initial first look of this class composition, what's happening in the world. Okay. Yeah. But now we're going to start with questions. So I'll ask you all to join this little class competition. You can choose your character. 10 out of 13, you can see how many of the 13 you got right. My question to you is, what's the message of this? What am I doing with this? Why did I ask you all of these questions? How is this related to the first question that I asked you about whether the world is getting worse or better? It seems like there are some optimistic things about the world. Some things are getting better. And there seems to be a miscalibration about how we feel about things, right? So we think things are getting worse, but there are lots of things where the world is getting a little bit better, right? So I think what's important about this is that we see a lot of things in social media, in the news, when we go to the university, and there's lots of reasons for pessimism. Generally, there's some stuff that is very difficult to comprehend and understand. I would like to introduce you to 2 big thinkers. Unfortunately, one passed away during the pandemic. So this is Hans Rosling. How many of you have seen or know of Hans Rosling? No? Factfulness, a very good book. So this guy has an amazing history, and he shares that in his book as a doctor that goes to places with poverty and really helps places in the global south to fight pandemics and deal with health issues. What I like about this book is it's basing yourself on fact and 10 reasons why you're wrong about the world and why things are better than you think. He's not the only person who's arguing this. One of the biggest minds in psychology here, Steven Pinker, Enlightenment Now, makes a very similar case for reason, science, and humanism and progress, and also claims that things are much better than you think. So if you ever want to give this to somebody else, this question, it comes from Gapminder, and this is a company or a nonprofit that Hans Rosling has created. And there's a very big website that you can use in many different ways. You can give this to others and then check yourself. This is from 2017, and 12,000 people back in the day did this, but by now we've got distribution of people from all over the world. If you're taking judgment and decision making with me in the other course, you've seen this video, but I think this video is terrific because it really shows the spirit of factfulness and the wonderful person that Hans Rosling is about how do we know things that we think we know about the world.
Poland, Russia, Pakistan, and South Africa. And these were the results.
Okay, so he's giving this question to students. He's giving them 5 questions saying, which country has the highest child mortality? Sri Lanka, Turkey, Poland, South Korea. And then he's checking the Swedish students because he's from Sweden, how many they would get right. And you can see that they got right 1.8 out of the 5, okay?
Of the Swedish students. I did it, so I got a confidence interval which was pretty narrow, and I got happy, of course. I had 1.8 right answer out of 5 possible. That means that there was a place for a professor of international health and for my course. But one late night, when I was compiling the report, I really realized my discovery. I have shown that Swedish top students know statistically significantly less about the world than the chimpanzees. Because the chimpanzee would score half right. If I gave them 2 bananas with Sri Lanka and Turkey, they would be right, half of the cases. But the students are not there. The problem for me was not ignorance, it was preconceived ideas. I did also an unethical study of the professors of the Karolinska Institute that hands out the Nobel Prize in medicine, and they are on par with the chimpanzee there. So this is where I realized that there was really a need to communicate, because the data of what's happening in the world and the child health of every country is very well aware. So we did this software which displays it like this. Every bubble here is a country. This country over here is this is China. This is India. The size of the bubble is the population. And on this axis here, I put fertility rate. Because my students, what they said when they looked upon the world, and I asked them, what do you really think about the world? Huh? Well, I first discovered that the textbook was Tintin mainly. And they said the world is still we and them. And we is Western world, and them is third world. And what do you mean with Western world? I said, well, that's long life in small family, and third world is short life in large family. So this is what I could display here. I put fertility rate here, number of children per woman, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to about 8 children per woman. We have very good data since 1962, 1960 about, on the size of families in all countries. The error margin is narrow. Here I put life expectancy at birth, from 30 years in some countries up to about 70 years. And 1962, there was really a group of countries here that was industrialized countries, and they had small families and long lives. And these were the developing countries. They had large families, and they had relatively short lives. Now, what has happened since 1962? We want to see the change. Are the students right? It's still 2 types of countries? Or have these developing countries got smaller families and they live here? Or have they got longer lives and live up there? Let's see. We start the world. And this is all UN statistic that has been available. Here we go. Can you see there? It's China. They're moving against better health. They're improving there. All the green Latin American countries, they are moving towards smaller families. The yellow ones here are the Arabic countries, and they get larger families, but longer lives, but not larger families. The Africans are the green down here. They still remain here. This is India. Indonesia is moving on pretty fast. And in the 80s here, you have Bangladesh still among the African countries there. But now Bangladesh, it's a miracle that happens in the 80s. The imams start to promote family planning, and they move up into that corner. And in 90s, we have the terrible HIV epidemic that takes down the life expectancy of the African countries, and all the rest of the world moves up into the corner where we have long lives and small family, and we have a completely new world.
So Hans Rosling was one of the first who said, let's just plot the data to allow people to see what's happening in the world. So this is the first time that he exposed to the world in a TED Talk this wonderful app that he had, was just plotting and letting people run the progress over time. And then you can see very clearly that things are changing for the better. We used to have this we and them, when we used to have the developing verse, but now everybody is moving in a similar direction. And now you can actually do this by yourself, because Gapminder has improved a lot over the last, 15 years since this came out. So if you press this and you have a look and you want to know what's happening, you can actually plot everything. So instead of life expectancy, you can look at whatever you want to look at, including emissions, daily income, population, ecology, education, whatever you want, you can plot this here. You can also put whatever is interesting to you down there, and then you can just run these things. And then you can just track this over time. You can also decide that some countries you want to look at that are more interesting to you. That's, for example, China, right? So you can look at China and then track China over time. But what's nice about this is that instead of us guessing things and basing ourselves on intuition or about the media or TikTok, we can go to some of these tools that take the best data that we have from the World Bank, from the UN, from the best sources of information with very narrow margin for error, and then just plot things for ourselves. So I'll just show you some of the things that we discussed over here in the quiz. You can see the monkeys over here. I don't know if you got these questions right or wrong, but you can see that most of the people in the countries around the world get this significantly less than the monkeys. So low-income countries around the world today, how many girls finish primary school? So it seems like things are much better than we think. This is, I think, is really outstanding. When people think about, I would have preferred to live in the 1960s, or I would have preferred to live in the 1920s. Really, in the 1920s, we didn't have antibiotics. Anybody who got scratched could barely survive the infection. 5 out of 6 children can die just in birth. And then this thing about extreme poverty from the 1800s to today, just see this decrease, very severe decrease in poverty to about 9%. So would you rather be born in a time where 90% of people around you were living in poverty? This is not how we imagine, the movies and the nostalgia makes us earn to some time in the past was much better. But in any year that you choose in our history, we've done a lot better than the rest when it comes to poverty reduction. So Hans Rosling is not saying things are not, things are perfect. There are no problems. He's saying things are pretty bad. 9% poverty is still very, very bad. But it used to be a lot worse. And we are working in order to solve these problems. So it is bad, but it is getting better. So rather than looking at right now, what should we be focusing on, you should look at the trends on how things are going. So I'm going to share with you a lot of the trends that are happening. They're very counterintuitive. They were counterintuitive to me. But whenever I see a headline claiming something about the world, including the situation where I grew up in Israel, including about what's happening in the US with climate change, we want to understand our capacity in order to address these things. And overall, as a trend around the world, how people are dealing with this. So extreme poverty, not just in specific countries, but all over the world, has really gone down almost to 0% in the developing countries. COVID kind of bounced up a little bit because COVID was a big problem, but it's amazing the resilience of the world by being able to overcome something as big as COVID to come back to the pre-trend of this reduction. So you can see the reduction is actually keep going with time. Life expectancy, if you were born 100 years ago, you wouldn't make it to 40. Now, if 200, 300 years ago, don't know if you would make it even younger than this, but now we get to live up to 72. And if you're in Hong Kong, one of the highest life expectancies in the world, so you get to live much longer, especially females. So you can see like the increase from the 1800s until now to 72. We doubled our life expectancy, and there's good reason for optimism about us, not just being able to live longer, but also being healthier and having higher well-being overall, even in the last years. You can see just like generally that people get this very wrong, including the people who hand up the Nobel Prize and the people from universities and even professors just don't get this right about the life expectancy and how well we've improved over the years. I'm going to skip this one. It seems like people are very pessimistic about the gap between males and females. If you were female 100 years ago, oh my gosh, not good to be female 100 years ago. Definitely, the longer you go back in history, the worse it is to be female. There's no better time to be female than in the world today. Still, way to go. 9 to 10 is not 10 to 10, right? But things are really changing. And if you're at HKU, you might have noticed that even in the exact sciences, females are having better education. And even the income gap is getting narrower and narrower. Vaccinations, I have time for this? Yeah, I have time for this. I'll show you one more example from the very amusing Hans Rosling.
The challenge we have now, is to get away from understand what the majority is. And that was very clearly shown in this question. We asked, what is the percentage of the world's 1-year-old children who have got those basic vaccines against measles and other things that we've had for many years? 20, 50, or 80%. Now, this is what the US public and the Swedish answered. And you see, look at the Swedish result, you know what the right answer is. Who the heck is professor of global health in that country? Well, it's me. It's me. You see? It's very difficult, this. It's very difficult. However, Ola's approach to really measure what we know made headlines, and CNN published these results on their web, and they had the questions, there millions answered, and I think there was about 2,000 comments, and this was one of the comments, I bet no member of the media passed the test, he said. So Ola told me, take these devices, you are invited to media conferences, give it to them and measure what the media know. And ladies and gentlemen, for the first time, the informal result from a conference with US media. and then lately from the European Union media. You see, the problem is not that people don't read and listen to the media. The problem is that the media doesn't know themselves. What shall we do about this, Ola? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, so Hans passed away, but Ola continues with Gapminder, and he represents the organization and keeps on going with this. This I really like because it really gives me hope that maybe we'll be able, with some miracle, to address the problem with climate change. So it used to be that we thought there's no way that solar and wind are going to win over coal, but you can see this unbelievable exponential growth about solar and wind coming up. And the United Kingdom has shut down its last coal mine, or it's about to shut down the last coal producing factory over there. So the United Kingdom just went down to basically zero from coal factories emissions. And what I like about this character here is that sometimes we see a fall. So definitely in the last few years, given the pandemic and a lot of challenges that we've had as a society, there are some declines. But if you plot this up as a trend, you'll see that the trend overall is very positive. So there's a video. I'm not going to run this, but it goes you through all the changes in society when it comes to all the measures that you had in your quiz, showing that generally the world does seem to be getting better rather than worse. So I'm going to skip this for now. Now, the task that you have in your book is to discuss why is this happening. It could happen because of misinformation and disinformation. Some people are doing this deliberately, and this is a big problem. They have a goal. They want you to do something that perhaps they're inclined to want to change or do in the world. But many sources of information, a lot of people, TikTokers, YouTubers who are doing these kinds of things or are sharing this misinformation don't really know that they're doing this. They really think that this is the truth, but they're biased in all sorts of different ways. And then I try to show you some of the sources of bias. Christy also covered a little bit in her tutorial about some of the different ways in which we don't process information objectively. And then a lot of people are biased. Me, you, media educators and experts, even us professors, even the Nobel Prize, the people who give the Nobel Prize are biased in some ways. So all kinds of different instincts. And in the book, hopefully you'll be able to cover some of them in the different topics that you have over there. I'm just going to talk about very specific ones. Gap instinct, some people also call this dichotomous choice. So looking at only the extremes and not looking at things in the middle. And then the negativity instinct. So the gap instinct is like when you have a whole distribution, people just look at the very extreme ones. So things seem to be very polarized, especially when it comes to politics. Right now in the US and in various places around the world, the right wing and the left wing. But when it comes down to people just sitting down and talking about policy, I don't know if you follow the American politics and if you look at the vice presidential debate, actually, when you have a calm discussion about things, they find out they actually agree on many of the topics. And the problem is people in the top, Trump versus Kamala Harris, just seem to take things into the extreme, especially on the Trump side. So this polarizing is something that really creates the sense that there's nobody in the middle anymore, where actually, in fact, most of the people are somewhere in the middle. We talk about extreme poverty and we talk about the people, the millionaires and the billionaires and Elon Musk and what it is that he's doing in the world. Actually, most of us are the middle income. Somewhere in between. So don't compare averages, look at the distribution, don't compare extremes, look at where everybody is, and then take a top-down view. This is Steven Pinker. I'm going to show you last videos from him to introduce really the problem of bias and why we should look at things a little bit differently. Biases, if you want to, he's one of the biggest thinkers in psychology and generally in philosophy and beyond. If you want, his course is now available and you're welcome to go and learn from him. This headline that he's been talking about, that nobody ever ran, of people escaping poverty. So I just want to leave you with the message that many of the biases that we have to do with the way that the media operates. And it does seem like if you look at the negativity of things, it used to be that we had very positive news, especially after the Second World War. There's reasons for optimism, but this doesn't sell. Headlines that are negative tend to sell a lot more. Therefore, you can see that generally the trend is to become more and more negative over time. And we have all kinds of different articles coming about this, about what is the impact of using negative words. So YouTubers and TikTokers know about this. If they want to get you to click or to view for longer, then they need to use words of anger and rage, that people can share this, like this, retweet this, or even react to this a little bit more. So we can see all kinds of different things. So there's a reduction in click rate when it comes to positive words, but whenever you use negative words, it really is a way to increase. So It's not like I blame the YouTubers and the TikTokers for doing this deliberately, but obviously there's an incentive systems that if you want to make money off of this, then you need to use. And people learn after a while. YouTubers and TikTokers know how to adjust the way that they communicate in order to get people to click even more. And we don't notice the important things. So for example, how many deaths do you need to have in order to get noticed for things like food shortage? You need a lot of deaths for that. But when there's a storm, like the ones that are happening right now in the US, they have a lot of issues, but they're very focused on the storm. And Trump makes use of that when he argues for the need to replace the government over there. But the storm actually is a lot lower than all of the rest. We also see causes of death in the US. Terrorism or the migrants or the border control and all that gets a lot of media attention, about 35% from various sources. People don't really talk about heart disease or cancer, but when you look at the actual causes of death, heart disease is among the highest. Cancer is kind of a little bit better calibrated, but where is terrorism? Terrorism is here. The problem with migrants and the border and the crime down here. The big problems are not discussed because the media wants you to fear. They want you to discuss. They want you to click. They want you to linger. They want you to buy newspapers. So we need to study all of these biases in the media. One of the things that I studied many times, I did articles about this, we did replications on this, and it's one of the strongest effects is negativity bias. We react a lot stronger to negativity. I suffer from this every time I get evaluations from students because I can have a lot of wonderful evaluations, but if there's one that hates me and gave me a negative one, that's the one that I'm going to remember, unfortunately. It could be that you submitted some essay and you got a wonderful review, but then there's one comment where the professor wrote something and that hit too close to home. That's the thing that you remember, because the negative one is the one that lingers and the positive ones do not. So sometimes we need a ratio of something like 1 to 10 in order to remember these things. Even in relationships, and the people that we love, sometimes the bad interactions that we have with these people overwhelm all the good things that we had with them. Sometimes we need a ratio of 1 to 10, 1 to 4 in order to overcome these things. So it's a big, big bias, and we need to understand this better. There's lots of good people who wrote many books on this. One of the people is The Power of Bad and Roy Baumeister. This is one of the biggest papers. You can see how many times it's cited. I think that was 3 years ago. By now, it's probably reached a few thousand more. So it's a review from 2001, just generally saying bad is stronger than good. And this also applies to media and the way that we process information. This I'll skip, but my main message to you, the thing that I want you to walk away with, is that you need to know your calibration. Overconfidence and underconfidence are not good. You need to be accurate about your understanding of the world. And even if you see information from what is considered to be credible source of information, like the media outlets, the big newspapers, even from professors, you have the tools like Gapminder to go and check what is actually happening in the world, and not just check right now, this focal point in time, but also check the trends, what's happening over the last few years, and then make a decision on that. So hopefully together, when we write this book that you need to submit next week, we'll be able to help ourselves and others understand how to process information, how to overcome things like negativity bias, how to look at things in a rational way like Steven Pinker and Hans Rosling suggest to us. So for us to be better calibrated and to help others to be better calibrated. Okay? So if you have any questions about the tasks, it will be a good time to ask me in the upcoming days. I look forward to seeing your chapters, and I hope you have a good reading week. I'll see you the week after.